Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another player breakdown on the Babylon Irons channel with myself, Mike, and Sloth today. This one's been brewing for a while. It's a player most of you are familiar with from the Premier League, and that is Max Kilman of Wolves. Being heavily linked now, rumours coming out that we've inquired for him. We've said before it's probably going to cost around, Wolves are kind of pricing it around 40 to 50 million, even some sources are saying. So it's an expensive one. What do we expect? It's a Premier League English centre back who's had a pretty good time at Wolves of recent memory. And yeah, I guess our job is to break it down, whether we'd go ahead with a move and what he could provide to that back line that we don't currently have. Because to be honest, last season there wasn't a lot to add to that back line. So just as an overview, looking at Kilman in his kind of entirety, still only 27 years old, 6'3", so very tall. His contract runs out in 2027. Obviously, plays centre back, the club captain for Wolves, and his estimated value is around 45 million. So, yeah, we'll get into kind of the stats in a bit, guys. But first impressions for the link to Kilman: impressed or not impressed?
I think it's just a case of the price. Like, I like him. I think he is one of those defenders who you could put in any position on the pitch, and he'd excel there as a footballer. Because to have a centre back who is 2-footed, comfortable on the ball as him, and is physically dominant is very rare. It's either one or the other normally, and I think it's even rarer to get that in a homegrown format, because we all know just how often English centre backs can be criticised for their lack of ball playing ability. But it's very much a case for me of value in this deal. And while I like him as a player, I do think that the big caveat to that is going to be how much Lopetegui values him and how much we're willing to spend on him, as opposed to, say, giving up to move on to someone else.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think as well, he's obviously been, one of Wolves' key players. So they're obviously going to price it very highly, and rightly so. We sat here when, whenever we've been kind of linked away with a player, we want us to price it high. We want us to get as much value as we can, because the asset's worth that to us as a club. Wolves are doing exactly that with the kind of 45 million price tag that they've put on Kilman this summer. So it's not going to be an easy deal to complete. But, in terms of his positives, it's very much what you get with Kilman in terms of his on the ball as well. Like you said, he's 6'3". He's coped with the physicality of the Premier League, which is one up on obviously a Ged, who has struggled, to be honest, playing left centre back for us. But in possession, you can see here with Kilman's statistics, comparing him with other centre backs in the top 5 leagues, his passing and in possession stats are very, very solid, very good across the board. Sorry. So yeah, I think in terms of his style, obviously, he's someone that likes to progress with the ball. He's someone similar to, again, in that he wants to break the lines. He's comfortable in possession. And obviously, like we said earlier, he's got that physical unit to him as well. So in terms of the links we've been getting, Sloth, obviously, Kilman's going to be probably one of the top centre-back targets. He's obviously worked for Lopetegui before at Wolves. So is it a move that excites you regardless of the price tag?
Not when I contrast it to potential deals out there. I think, we've spoken extensively about Jacob Greaves on this channel, and I think for a player who is the same height, he's not 2-footed, but he's also got the versatility of the option to play left back. And I think there's potentially a higher ceiling there. I know Wolves fans have been very critical of Kilman's performances recently. I do think there's a bit of salt to be taken with that, a pinch of salt, because we know that when Dawson and even Ogbonna, my dad's boss, he's a big Juventus fan. And when we saw him, he was saying he's useless. And he went on to become a bit of a hero. And I think you always kind of have to take a lot of what fans are saying as a bit of a jilted lover style comment on players. But it is fair to say that his performances have dipped since he sort of burst onto the scene. And as I mentioned, in caveat with a lot of the players about who are maybe available around that £20 million mark, like Greaves, a couple of centre backs that we're going to talk about later on, but also ones that we've covered, like Perez. It's the case that I don't really see enough overall that I myself would want us to spend that much, and that's why I think it's so important that it's down to Lopetegui, and if he values him at that, then go for it. But I can't quite bring myself to back it fully.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one because we've said it before, we need to kind of get the balance right between players that, are going to come in and give you those solid performances, 6, 7, 8 out of 10 each week. And you want to get the balance right with the players like Gil Herme, who's come in, looking at players from abroad who maybe more of a risk signing. But yeah, we need to get the balance right. I'm not saying just go for Prem proven, we're not kind of advocating for that, but we know Kilman's been a solid defender for Wolves. And I completely agree with your point. I was speaking to a Wolves fan not that long ago, and he mentioned, Kilman's not really he's captain for Wolves, but he doesn't really show it. He's not got kind of the captain leadership style to him. So again, if he removed that from his game and he wasn't, say, the club captain at West Ham, that might take off that pressure of what comes with being a captain, because it's a lot. And it definitely impacted Zuma this season. I think when he became captain, obviously it's not the direct causation of his dip in performances, but I definitely think it contributed to it. So in terms of 45 million, it's a lot of money. We've said the budget we need to be smart with the budget. I don't know, like Lopetegui, if it's his main target, does that necessarily mean and that we should go and spend 45 million on him, Slough, even if Lopetegui saying this is my number one target? Because we need to be careful for how we do the strategy, right? It needs to come from, both Steiden and Lopetegui. They need to be on the same page.
Well, we know that the key thing for Wolves' valuation is very much that sell-on clause. Is it 15 or 20%? Or it's a large amount of the deal, any deal that would go through. And I think when you're factoring that in, it very much skews the numbers in terms of what Wolves would actually take themselves. I think it's also a case of balancing it out. And look, if it is Lopetegui's number one target, it's a bit like we were talking about with Moyes and Billing. Then yes, there's a player there, and yes, it's someone who is proven. But financially, at the end of the day, if we are able to bring in other targets that the manager likes, then perhaps that's something that we could balance it out by signing an En-Nesyri or moving for an En-Nesyri or one of these players that we hear about Lopetegui really having worked with or really rating himself. So it's a tough one. I think there's potentially something to be done late in the window. We never know or seem to know with football ownership these days quite how the owners are going to prioritize things towards the end of the window. And obviously with Kilman, they paid quite a low fee for him. So
yeah,
it's a case of they can take that in as profit and then potentially look to spend it on a few players. And they've already, hijacked a youngster from Chelsea. And I think when you look at the direction they've been moving in recent windows, I think it's very much the kind of caveat that they'll probably be selling one big player this summer. It'll probably be Neto. And just because I think he's probably the easiest to replace.
Yeah.
But if they haven't done that by a certain point of the window, I think there'll be something to be done in terms of the structuring of the deal so that it maybe takes a bit of the burden off the initial cost. But
yeah,
I personally think that for the amount of money we're talking about, even if he is Lopetegui's number one target, I would potentially look to balance that out with him and say, we'll move for someone else who you really rate instead. But just financially, it doesn't make that much sense with the window.
Yeah, Mike, we had some technical issues there for those watching, but Mike's back. We kind of focused on the the positives of Kilman and what he does in terms of actually having possession of the ball. One thing we wanted to wait to go through is his defensive side, because the statistics themselves in isolation, they don't look, incredible in terms of, you can see the tackles there, but you can see again, like the blocks and shots blocked, he's that type of player when it comes to defending. So just talk us through these statistics here in terms of his defending style.
Yeah, I think Sloth summed it up that, he's a physical player. He does like to be involved. Yes, he hasn't been as good this year, but I think if we look at last year, the year before under Lopetegui, he was probably their best defender. And some of his statistics don't look great because obviously we're looking at it in isolation and so on. But if you was to directly kind of look at that in terms of, say, Kurt Zouma, someone we've talked about already today, right? So 1.24 tackles puts him in the 34 percentile in terms of how many tackles he makes per game. Now, that's below average. Again, there are stylistic things within that. That means why he maybe doesn't tackle as much. But if you look at that in terms of a direct comparison to Zouma is making 0.76 per 90, which puts him in the 3rd percentile of centre-backs across the top 5 leagues. When you look at tackles in defensive third, Zouma makes 0.48 against Kilman's 1.5. Again, that puts Zouma, which is ridiculous, again, in the 4th percentile, whereas Kilman is above average in that respect, in the 63rd. So you start to look at certain things and realize, well, actually, is it as bad? 75% of all tackles made against dribblers is a success for Kilman, which makes him the 91st. Zouma, he's in the 72nd percentile because he's doing it at 66%. Again, with terms of blocks, shots blocked, passes blocked, all of those by Kilman far and exceed what Zuma's done. And in fact, he's well above average and practically 80 and above. Zuma's highest is shots blocked, which is in the 64th percentile, which is about 0.86.
Yeah.
So when you start to look in, you start to go, well, actually, is it an improvement on what we have? Well, statistically, 100%, it is a huge increase on what we already have. Also in possession, it's a massive increase. We've already shown Kilman's possession stats, and they're really quite impressive because everything is pretty much either slightly above average or well above average. And when you look at what we have with Kurt Zouma, again, you can say it's stylistic, which maybe has put some of that back. However, it does also show the complete disparity we have in certain players. And you can maybe argue that it's unfair to compare him to Zouma. Maybe we should compare him to Aged. But when we look at things such as that ability to win aerial duels, Aged is about 6'2". However, defensively in aerial battles, we all know he's incredibly weak. I think he's around about 52% or so in terms of the numbers of the percentile he wins. I think Kilman was around about 66%, give or take. So again, that's a huge increase. And he was, I think, one of the best headerers in the Premier League in aerial duels. I'm pretty sure he was within the top 4 or 5 within the Premier League. And when you look across a lot of statistics when it comes to Wolves, he is the first. When it comes to defenders, he has the most clearances, the most headers, and things like that. So whilst he's been criticised for not being good enough, he's also, technically speaking, from a statistical point of view, in far in advance of other defenders like Craig Dawson. But again, it's because people are looking at one is a captain, one was bought for a pittance. Therefore, the one bought for a pittance maybe doesn't get as much kind of focus as whereas the other one. And I know there's also been comments made that, well, if he was so good, he'd be in the England squad. I think you can take it with a pinch of salt because there's been certain players that have been in the England squad when they haven't deserved to over other players. And there are other players that actually started to come into, into form in recent years. And Kilman is 27. He's not, part of that young, fresh kind of piece. And also players like Tomori, who has been in incredible form, last year, over his time in Milan. He hasn't necessarily been as good recent years. But there are players who have missed out when they maybe shouldn't have. And Kilman's possibly, you would argue, one of those players who has missed out. And I don't think he's as bad a defender as it's maybe been talked about. And clearly, if Lopetegui is interested in him, he's interested in him because he trusts him from a defensive point of view and definitely trusts him in possession. And we've got to remember, we're not going to be maybe as defensively minded next year. Defenders need to be able to defend, obviously. However, what's going to be of greater importance is how they can help us on the ball, how they can start those attacks off, and how they can operate maybe in tighter spaces. And it's someone that he knows he can work with, and that can slot into that piece. I do think the price is way over the top, and there are reasons for that. Wolves need to sell really to carry on and buy, so they are going to overinflate. And it's as is their right. I think they're right to ask for that much money. I won't pay it, but I think they're right. They need the money. They can name their price.
Well, that kind of leads us on to our decision. Would we go ahead with the deal? Yes or no for 45 million? And if it did go ahead for 45 million, what would we give it out of 10?
I wouldn't go ahead of it 45 million. Personally, I wouldn't go over 30. Again, we know that they need to sell, and 30 million is still a good chunk of change. I would go nowhere near above that personally, because I don't think Kilman is worth that, and he's 28. I'd like us to be a bit more sensible, especially when we've done reviews, say, on Nayan Perez, who's going to be probably around about 16, 17 million pounds, who's 4 years younger, probably just as good a player. So you kind of think, well, why would you pay that much money when you can do that? Same with Jacob Greaves, even Will Greaves. Said it again, Sloth. Jacob Greaves. It just doesn't make financial sense to me. So if it was around 25 million, I'd probably say yes. Anything above that, I'm starting to say definitely no. But if you go anywhere over 30, I just don't see the point, because I think there are other players who are far less expensive, who could do his job and potentially could grow to be even better as players.
Sloth, what about you? And what would you give it out of 10?
Yeah, well, I think Mike summed that up quite well. I think I would maybe be a little bit more flexible with how much I'm willing to spend. I think
this is a role change from yesterday.
Yeah, I think if Lopetegui wants him, then I'd probably be willing to go up to about 35 or 40. But I think it's just that amount of money, and there's lots of talk about the budget. I think the caveat to that is, if we sell Aguerd for £25 million, then potentially it's only a slight jump from there, and it's pretty much covered by the sales of Kara and Aguerd. But it's just the sheer dearth of quality that's out there, and that's how I kind of have to put my thinking cap on and say I wouldn't give it more than about a 5 out of 10. I think he's a very good defender in many aspects, and if you were to come in for Aguerd and Zuma next year, I think, at least from a physical point of view, we'd see a great improvement, because he will throw himself at things, he'll get stuck in, he'll win a lot more in the air, and I think that would be a massive contrast to the defence last season. But it's just that amount of money and the amount of work we've got to do this summer. So I'd say 5 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, I think you think you're right, Mike. It might just be a waiting game with this one, because obviously Wolves do need to sell. They're obviously going to label their assets as high as they can. As you mentioned, they're rightly to do that. We did it with Declan Rice. So you just have to hold out as best you can. But yeah, I think in terms of what Kilman's actually worth, I wouldn't pay more than 30. I agree with you, Mike. I don't think it's worth spending the money on that type of player right now, who's, as you say, 27 years old, is an improvement on what we've got. But again, with the sheer volume of work we need to do this summer and other options available like Perez, as you mentioned, it doesn't make sense to me to pay that much. So yeah, I think it's one to watch, this one. It's obviously a player that we've, liked for a long time, not just with Lopetegui. We've been linked with him before as well. So Lopetegui clearly likes him. He's worked with him before. There's positives to the deal. He's very comfortable in possession. Defensively, again, very solid. Clearances, blocks. He's something you would want in a defender. It's just whether he's worth more than, whether he's worth 45 million to Wolves and also to West Ham to pay that. So yeah, going to be an interesting one. Leave a comment on the video. Let us know what you think about the potential move for Kilman to West Ham. Would you be on board with it? Would you pay the 45 million and get it done ASAP? let us know. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed the breakdown. Subscribe to the channel for more content. And yeah, lads, until the next one.
Come on, you irons.